Beware, this video will be very challenging, but it will also be very rewarding, I guess, because in this video, no more and no less will implement our own middleware implementation. Yes, you heard it right. We will write our own middleware implementation from scratch to achieve functionality very similar to what we have in ASP.NET Core. Curious about how we can implement that? Stay tuned. Hey there and welcome back to the Code Wrinkles channel. As I said, in this video we'll implement our very own and custom and personalized middleware implementation. The whole idea behind it is that it will allow us to understand a lot of very important topics, and especially it will allow us to understand how we can implement in our applications functionality that rely on decorators. Like when we have a main function that we want to execute, but we also have other things that we want to add to that specific execution, like for instance cross-cutting concern, because middleware in ASP.NET Core is nothing else than an implementation of the decorator pattern. And once we get the hang on it, we will be able to apply this concept really in all applications that we build, even in very small and simple console applications or in services that don't have necessarily a UI and that don't rely on ASP.NET Core. Really, if you get a hang on it, you will be able to implement this powerful way of building software in any type of use case and application scenario that you might face. So let's get over to Rider and start coding. First of all, let's understand and define exactly what we would like to achieve in this video. And I have already prepared here a bunch of classes like this bubble sorter that contains a method for bubble sorting, the insertion sorter that obviously contains a method for insertion sorting, and selection sorting or selection sorter which contains a method for selection sorting. I will not dive deeper into how these very simple sorting algorithms are supposed to work because that's not the scope of this video. But what we want to do instead is to create our very own sorting application that looks like or is very similar to what we know in ASP.NET Core and the web application in ASP.NET Core. So we want to have a configurable sorting application to which we would be able to add some functionality, like for instance logging or exception handling, or well, pampering with the request or the processing when it starts or getting the response when it ends and things similar to that. So I want to do that. Now, obviously, the main goal is I don't want to clutter my sorting algorithms with this type of logic that's mostly cross-cutting concerns. I want to keep this separately. And that's a very clear scenario where we would have to implement something like a decorator pattern. And by the way, the middleware in ASP.NET Core is nothing else than a decorator, and that's exactly what we would also need to implement here. Now, to get started, I have already created here this very basic enum which contains the sorting algorithms that we want to use in a certain processing or in a certain sorting process of some list of integers. But I would like to also be able to change this on the fly through our own middleware to our own decorators that we will create. Now, in order to be able to work with that, similar to what we have in ASP.NET Core, the HTTP context, we would need a context that contains some information for processing a certain sorting operation. And therefore, what we'll do here is go ahead and create here a sorting context. And this sorting context will contain a few very simple properties. First of all, it will include a list of integers which will represent the initial list of integers, so I named this request. Then it will contain a second list of integers which is the response and which will contain the sorted list of integers. And then we have a property that specifies the sorting algorithm that we want to use. And by default, we want to use the bubble sorting algorithm. Now, this is all the contextual information that we need for our sorting app. Now that we have this behind us, we can go to the next step and move to this idea of delegate, because when we want to implement this type of decoration or decorator pattern similar to what we have in middleware, the idea of delegates is really crucial. So let's go here and add a new class, and we'll call this class request delegate. And also the request delegate will contain a very small piece of information. I just replace the entire class with just this delegate definition. Now this is a plain old C# delegate, it returns void, so we don't really want to return anything from here, but it's a request delegate, that's how we call it. And the main point here is that it takes in a sorting context. So the idea of delegate is they are actually variables for methods. You can also think about delegates like placeholder for methods. And that's actually very powerful because this enables us to really have this idea of delegate and use it in our code everywhere as a placeholder. And at a certain point, we can just provide an implementation for that specific delegate that takes in a sorting context and performs the sorting magic. So the idea is that what we want to do is that in this app.use, we want to be able to take this original request delegate that will do the sorting, but we would like to add around this delegate maybe other stuff that we want to do. To achieve this, the next step that we need to do is to create the sorting app itself. And that would be the class sorting app. Now, this sorting app class will be the most complex class in our project. The very first thing that I would like to add to this sorting app is the basic functionality of picking up a certain algorithm for sorting and perform the sorting based on that algorithm. And I have already prepared some code here, and I will add the missing using statements, and we should be good to go with this one. Now, what we do here is that we have this method sort numbers, which is a private because it will be used only within this class. And here is once again a very basic implementation based on an if, else, if, and else. So if the algorithm is bubble sort, then yeah, we also write to the console, hey, we do a bubble sort. And then obviously we use the bubble sorter to perform the sort. And we set the new list or the sorted list of integers, we set it to the response on the context. Now in the else if, obviously here we look if the algorithm is maybe insertion sort, we perform exactly the same type of steps. The only difference is that we will use an insertion sorter in this class, in this case, and once again we'll set the response like the sorted array or the sorted list of integers in the context response, so that the consumer, in our case my program, at a certain point will be able to pick that up and maybe do something with that specific response. And if this case or this case was not true, then obviously the default that we want to do is we'll do a selection sort. And once again, it's exactly the same thing. We just instantiate the selection sorter and we do the sort with this selection sorter, and we set the sorted list of integers to the response of the context. So that's the core functionality. That's the very, very basic functionality of our sorting app. The next step is to implement the private fields that we might need and the constructor that we would need for this sorting app. And I'll call this sorting app, and it should be like that. Now, the idea is that I will go one-on-one through this. So first of all, we need this list of Func. This time it's Func, and we'll see exactly why. And the Func will take in a sorting context, obviously, because we need a sorting context to perform a sorting. And it will take in a request delegate, and it will return a request delegate. And that's actually the scenario or the way that we can use to kind of like pipe different such delegates together and create a pipeline out of them. And we'll see just in a few moments how this works. But the idea is that every time we will do an app.use, basically we'll take what we get in the app.use and we'll add it to this middleware field. And when we execute basically the sort, what we'll do here is we'll go through the entire list of funcs and we'll chain all the funcs together, and then we'll execute them, then we'll fire them up. So let's get ourselves a little bit of room here, and here is this sort method. That's also a public one that will be executed by the client. But what we do here is, first of all, when we execute this sort method, we take in a list of integers. So we set this list of integers to the request because that's the initial list that needs to be sorted. And here is on this line is where we start building up our pipeline. So at this point, what we have in our application is a list of middleware that was registered by the consumers. And we have the delegate, the initial delegate with the functionality that we want to execute. So what we will do to actually chain everything together and build a real pipeline here is we'll obviously go through the list of the middleware that we have. And for each element in the specific list, we access the middleware and we set it in this variable. The idea is that what we want to do, and that's how the chaining actually works on delegate. Because we have this delegate right now, which at this specific point where the first time or during the first iteration of this loop, this delegate will be equal to actually this sort numbers, because that's what we have placed in the delegate. However, what we do here is we say, okay, the delegate now is the middleware, like what we have registered, and to this we pass in the context that we have and the delegate or the current state of the delegate. And this is a func, remember, so this will return a new delegate and we'll set it, or the new delegate will, or the delegate will take the new value of the delegate that is already created with the additional functionality. Then when we come the second time here around, the delegate will already include the previous functionality and the original functionality. So when we say middleware once again and the context and the delegate, it will actually create a new delegate that will nest all the other two previously added delegates. And that's how this pipelining works. It's very, very nice and powerful. And when we have done, or when we are completed and through all the middleware that we might have in our applications, then we can just simply execute the delegate, and it will execute everything, or all nested delegates that we have in there will be executed, including all the around functionality that we have created. Now that we have this set up, let's move over maybe to our program application and see how we can consume this sorting application. Now that we are here, let's get rid of this console write line because we don't really need it anymore. And let's start to set up all the things that we need here. So first of all, we want to create a new instance of this sorting app. That's very similar, I would say, to the web application in ASP.NET Core once again. The only difference is that we don't use a builder here, we just create an instance of this sorting app. And what we also create is an initial list of integers like this 4, 2, 3, 1. Of course, that's the list of numbers that we will need to sort. To sort things, we could just say here app.sort, and we can just provide here the numbers. And right now everything should already work because we have a sort, we don't really have any type of middleware. So if we run the application right now, it should just it should sort everything for us. So we see that it's completed, but what I would still like to do here, of course, to make it visible and to understand exactly that all those numbers were actually sorted, let's just also add this very brief thing here, because after the sort on the context, we have the response, which is the sorted list of integers. So we iterate through that list and we write the numbers on the console. So let's run it again. And here it is, 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. So we have a very basic running application right now, but we don't have any type of middleware. And let's start to configure this application. So we have this very basic functionality of sorting, but we want to configure it and to add additional cross-cutting functionality to this entire process. And we want to use the middleware. And the first thing that we might want to do is to have a very basic exception handling, but we don't want to do the try-catch in the sorting itself. We want to do this as a cross-cutting concern in a decorator or in a middleware. To achieve this, we just need to come here and simply use this app.use method that we have defined previously. As we have defined it as a func that takes in a sorting context, a request delegate as next, and it will also return a request delegate instead. We have here this very basic console write line. Let's call it this first registered middleware, because this is for the exception handling and it should be probably the first in the pipeline. As you will see, also in our case, the order matters because they will be executed in a certain order. We have this try, and in this try we put this return next. But the idea is that if an exception occurs during this execution of the delegates, then we will catch this exception and we'll write the exception to the console, and then we will simply rethrow that. Now, let's say that right now we know that by default our sorting context uses the bubble sort. What if we want to use a different sorting algorithm? Well, nothing more simpler than that. Just add a new middleware to the pipeline. So a new call to the app.use, once again the context and the next, because that's the func definition that we need to pass in here to this use. What we'll do here is, let's call this would be the second middleware in the pipeline in this case. And what we'll do here is we have access to the context, like that's the context. And that's why on the algorithm we can simply change it and replace it, or we define it or set it to use the selection sort instead of the bubble sort, which is the default, and then once again we return the request delegate. Last but not least, let's also imagine another scenario that we might execute some logic, and until we reach this execution part, we come to the conclusion that we want to add some numbers to the original list of numbers that were part, or that was part of what we have defined here. And we would need to actually do that, and I would like to achieve this via a middleware. So we'll just add the middleware for this, context.next, as usual as we have done previously. Here adding a number during the execution, that's what we do here. And as we have the context, once again we have access to the context, and that's why it's important that the func also contains the context, and then the request, and to the request we have the original list of numbers. So we just add the number 10 to that specific list. Now that we have implemented all this cross-cutting functionality, let's see if our application still works, so let's run it again. So here we have the result. And if we take a look into this, let's go back to the console. So we see all the things that were logged to the console. First registered middleware, exception handling, then second registered middleware, change the algorithm, and then adding a new number during execution. That's what we have done here. Now to prove that we have set the algorithm correctly, we have this sorting via selection sort here, not via bubble sort as we had initially. And then if we go and loop and write the sorted response to the console, we see that it includes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 10. So it also includes the number that we have added as a middleware or through the middleware. But before we wrap this up, I would simply want to go here to this app, and I would like to place a breakpoint here and run everything once again so that we have a clear understanding on how this pipeline is actually built. So let's debug it this time. Now the execution stopped here at this line, right now 28. So the first thing we have to notice, what is the state of this delegate by the time we reach this stage of the execution? Well, it's the default delegate that we have set in the constructor, which is the sort numbers. So this contains the original functionality that we want to apply, sorting the numbers. That's the logic that's implemented here. If we go through this here step by step, so first of all, we go through our middleware. So every time we added a middleware, we have added that actually to our list of func of sorting context, request delegate, and that's return a request delegate. So we should have a list populated with these three funcs. So if we go here on this, we see that we have count 3. So that's correct. So all our middleware was added to this list. Now the only thing that we need to do is to build that pipeline. And pipeline, we can build that pipeline by simply chaining those delegates together, basically by nesting them. So when we reach this line 30, the delegate, once again, the initial state here is the sort number. So this is what it will be executed. But here we assign it actually to the output of this middleware func, which once again takes in a context, takes in a delegate or the original delegate that we have with the original state, and it will return a new delegate that will include both the original state or the original function, but it would also include the things that we had in the func. If we go further, the second iteration through the loop, we go right now, or we arrive to our second middleware, which is the one that is changing actually the sorting context or the context. And if we look at the context right now, if we expand that and we see that algorithm, we see that it's bubble sort, and that's a very important detail. And yeah, let's execute it once again. We get the middleware from the list. We have the original state of the delegate, which includes the original function and all the functioning that we have added previously. So we take the delegate and we execute this middleware, passing the context, the delegate that already includes the previous functionalities, and this will return a new delegate instead, nesting everything that we have used so far. So by the time that we actually exit this for loop, what we have here is a nested delegate with all the functionality that we have created down the line. So in this line 33, we just execute this delegate, and then we just execute this sort, and we write everything to the console. And if we go to the console, we see that we have all the things. So remember, let's go back to the console, that here we use the selection sort. Remember when we have looked into the context that it was having actually the bubble sort before we have executed the second middleware. So that's actually what we have done here. We have simply just substituted or changed the algorithm that we wanted to execute via a middleware, and by nesting, by chaining, by pipelining all these type of funcs, we have arrived to this kind of like nested functionality, and everything was applied when we actually ran that delegate and executed the method. And last but not least, obviously we have the final result, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4. So everything is okay, and our application is working. That's what we wanted to achieve in this video, and we have achieved that. Okay, we have covered quite some ground here in this video. And as you see, implementing own middleware-like structures or functionalities by pipelining different functionalities to add on top of a function, for instance, that you want to execute is not really complicated, but it's also not very easy at all. You just need to understand this whole concept of delegates and funcs and how you can chain those together. My advice to you, if you didn't really understand everything 100%, go on and create a very basic side project just like we did in this video and implement a functionality similar to what we had here. Practice will help you understand better and more in depth all the different concepts of programming in general. And believe me, this idea of pipelining behavior, like the decorator pattern, that's very important, and it has a lot of use cases in a whole bunch of different scenarios. If you have enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button and like this video so that others might discover it easier. Also, if you didn't subscribe to this channel, please hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so that you are always notified when there is new content on this channel. And if you have any question or if you just want to get in touch, don't be shy and head over to the comment section of this video and just leave a comment, and I would be more than happy to get a discussion started with you. This being said, thank you very much for watching, and until the next time, I wish you the very best.